Today's guest has spent decades learning how to adapt from gin-clear spring creeks of the East Coast to broad, powerful flows of the Yellowstone Teton region. In this episode, we're going to dig into what it takes to prepare for a World Fly Fishing Championship and how fishing under pressure sharpens your skills for everyday anglers. By the end of this episode, you'll understand how to scout new rivers with intention, why seasonal shifts in the Tetons can completely change your game plan, and what separates comp-ready anglers from weekend explorers. This is the Traveled podcast series where we bring you new places to fish, new tools you can prepare for that trip, and the mindset you need to make every trip count. Today's guest, Mike Komara, shares his process for fishing big western waters versus the intimate spring creeks of Pennsylvania, his go-to routine and prep for the World Championships, and tactics he trusts when the drift counts most. This episode is presented by Visit Idaho's Yellowstone Teton Territory, home to some of the most famous and diverse waters in the country. All right, let's jump into it. Here we go. This is Mike Komara. You can find him at innovativeangling.com. How you doing, Mike?
Hey, good. How you doing, Dave?
Not too bad. Not too bad. This is going to be a fun episode. I always love some of the episodes we do with, competition, talking about competition, Euro Nymphing, Team USA. We've done a number of them over the years where I think the exciting thing now is that it's all back to the home waters. So I think the youth team, the women's were in Eastern Idaho fishing this year, and now you guys are going to be back, the men's, but you've also got a big history. I think you've got a number of medals under your belt, so we're going to talk about that. But maybe before we jump into it, why don't you give us a background, kind of what you got going now, where you're at, and, kind of how things got going for you.
Yeah, sure thing. So I've been competing since about 2014. So pretty much all of my childhood and all my adulthood so far has been spent in competition and learning competition tactics. I also love fishing for pretty much anything outside of trout too. Big musky guy. But so that's my main fly fishing background has been competition here in the Eastern US. I've been on the Worlds team. I started with the youth team in 2016 when I was 16 years old. Went to 3 Worlds with them over the next 3 years in Slovenia, Poland, and the Czech Republic. Took a little break for college / COVID, and then got back into it when I kind of graduated. And with the men's team, kind of overhauled their application or qualification process. And so it was a whole new way of doing it, and I got involved in that. Ended up doing pretty well, and I was added to the World's team for 2024, 2025, and that was France in 2024, where we got a bronze, and then actually back to the same waters that I fished in the Czech Republic for the Youth World Championships this year. Got another bronze there.
Oh, so. You did? Yeah, so you guys have another bronze this year.
Yeah.
Which is pretty big, right? For if you look at the history of the adults, is that it's pretty challenging. Getting any sort of a medal in that arena is pretty tough, right?
Yeah, it's definitely the senior championships are the stiffest competition out there. You have pretty much all the best anglers in the world in that at the moment. So it's always been tough. We've definitely evolved as a country really well over the past couple of years, and we're feeling pretty confident now. But we'll see how things go.
Right. It's coming up now. Did you see? I'm sure you kept up a little bit with it. How the women and the youth did this year out there.
Yeah, for sure. It was really awesome to see them out there dominate on the home field, and I was keeping in touch with everyone as it was happening. So it's cool to get live updates.
Nice. How does that look now as you're thinking? Are you already kind of preparing? Is that how that works? You're getting ready for, what that's going to look like? I guess, is that going to be kind of in July and 26?
Yeah, for sure. So ours will be in September.
Oh, okay.
So it's going to be sometime around the middle of September there. But so we've had a few larger competitions out there over the past year, some regionals and interregionals to kind of get a handle on the venues. And then just like three weeks ago now, we had our national championships on the same waters. So we're kind of using that as a practice and to gain some intel on that water before we go to Worlds. And I think it's worked out really well. I think we're all going in feeling pretty confident about our ability to fish that area. And it's, really, really nice going into World Championships, actually having some recent info on what you're going to fish, prior to a week before.
Right. Do you guys know at this point, it's like basically a year from now, or do you know kind of what streams or what areas, or just kind of in general that area, or, what you're going to fish?
Just in general, kind of for that area. So we've, tried to maintain similar to what the youth and women's was, and it should be pretty similar to that. But as far as specifically, we're still looking into that as things evolve. It'll make a difference how many teams actually sign up to come over. If we get a ton of teams, it'll be harder to do it on some certain venues, and it might have to change. So it's going to depend on that.
That's right. And now, how many have you done? Let's say you've done 2 now, and they've both. So this will be your first on your home ground, right? Your first one with the world, with the adults, the seniors.
Yeah. Yep. First one on the home ground. I missed it in the youth by a year or two. So looking forward to it. And it's going to definitely be a lot more comfortable, if nothing else.
Yeah. Is it when you're, you look at your home waters where you're fishing and guiding kind of in Pennsylvania, all the famous creeks out there, is it a big change when you're, fishing that versus heading over to maybe some of the bigger stuff, or just that waters of kind of, Yellowstone area?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a massive change, especially the really clear high gradient rivers over there. Just, I don't really have many streams in Pennsylvania where I'm going to fish any flies heavier than a 3.0 on a regular basis. So pretty big difference as far as, setup and how you're fishing it. Obviously the fishing itself resonates, but you got to adapt a little bit for that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Just conditions. It's a higher gradient. So you're using, is your rig, maybe talk about that a little bit. We've heard a lot about different methods, especially from competition anglers on, rods and setups. What does yours look like? Do you have a certain rig you use kind of anywhere, everywhere? Or what does that look like?
So I'm a big single fly guy. Kind of fish that is probably 80% of the time out here in Pennsylvania. So I like to try and stick with what I'm comfortable with wherever I'm fishing. And, you can be a lot more efficient with one fly than two, getting less tangles, less break-offs and trees and that kind of stuff. So try and stick with that and just adapt it to the different conditions. Sometimes you have to change up based on what the fish are doing and what they want. But I'm big on, taking what and adapting it to whatever you come across.
Yeah. So single flies, and are the techniques diverse in what you do? I'm sure you kind of do a little bit of everything, but Euro nymphing is a big part of it?
Yeah. Yeah. So Euro nymphing is, definitely probably the biggest of the techniques we use. It's a lot broader set of techniques than it kind of started out as originally. So we're doing all sorts of stuff, from floating the cider to dry droppers. And, for a lot of places, there's a lot of actual single dry fly fishing. So always trying to meet the fish on their terms. They dictate what they want, and it's up to us to, abide by that. So, just got to be really dynamic with it.
Well, maybe let's take us back to kind of what you're doing there. And are you in kind of Pennsylvania most of the year, unless you're traveling? Is that kind of what it looks like?
Yeah. So I'm in, right now, southern Pennsylvania. So kind of around Harrisburg. And about a week, I'm moving up to Bellefonte, which is right around State College, kind of the central fishing area, all the famous central PA limestone streams. And that's where I spend most of my time.
Okay. And what are is that a pretty, if you just look at Pennsylvania in general, where you're living now to where you're traveling, are there some big changes there, or is it pretty much similar deal?
It's similar, just a lot more water around that central PA region. I have some cool stuff around me. I live on the Latort, which is obviously a really famous spring creek for the East Coast. And then the Yellow Breeches is near me as well, and I'll still continue guiding those. But for the most part, the really abundant fishing is right around that like central PA area. You got the Juniata, Spring Creek, Penns Creek, Fishing Creek, and just a whole bunch of other less famous stuff that's just as good, if not better.
Right, right. There's tons, and that's the unique thing. Is it all? I mean, you have all these spring creeks, which are what it kind of is known for, that area. But are there other diverse kind of stream types out there?
There definitely are. Pretty much all of them do have at least a little bit of spring influence in the upper parts. That whole valley is just a geologic anomaly, and you get springs popping out of all sorts of different places. But as you start going a little bit north of that, it does become a little more and more kind of freestone character to a lot of the rivers, a little bit less limestone, but there's great fishing pretty much all through, kind of depending on what you're looking for.
Okay. And now, so you've got all this going. How do you, maybe let's think about that a little bit on preparation. So as you get ready for, a year from now, what does that look like for you? Or maybe it's not even, maybe it's a month, from now you're going somewhere new. How are you kind of preparing for that? What does that look like? Or maybe you can use the worlds as an example.
Yeah. So, I mean, I like to say that fish are fish, especially when you're talking about trout. Pretty much everywhere I fish for them, they have more in common than they don't. So I try and keep things, like I was talking about, pretty consistent with the way I fish in central Pennsylvania, doing a lot of nymphing, being prepared for if they decide they want something else. But I try and keep it simple, try and keep it as condensed as possible with the gear I travel with, especially with the price of airline baggage these days.
Oh, yeah.
But so I have, my set of rods and reels that I bring. I've got my 10.5-foot nymphing rods that I use for nymphing, for dry flies. They're very adaptable pieces of equipment. And that's kind of what I'm fishing the majority of the time. You've got Euro lines off of that, which I can use depending on the leader, a microleader system, or a more tapered style leader, and throw dries and dry dropper out to 50 feet on it. So just trying to really use that gear for the majority of my fishing. And then got standard dry fly rods for, bigger rivers, casting flies far away, and, lake gear for fishing streamers in rivers and in lakes. So 10-foot 7-weight rods and a plethora of sinking lines. But it's, a lot of people think that competitors must have just a crazy amount of equipment laying around. But I really, for trout rods, I only have probably 6 rods that I really use, and maybe 1 or 2 others that are sitting around as backups. So
That's right. Okay. So that's it. So on the nymphing, maybe let's jump into that a little bit. What do you think, maybe there's overlap here, but as you get ready for this, the Worlds in 26, what is that rig? So you mentioned 10.5-foot. Is that kind of a 3-weight? And what does your kind of leader setup and rig look like there for that? Or what do you think you would be starting with?
yeah, so I'm fishing 10.5-foot rods. That's a personal preference. A lot of people like 10-footers. I like a little bit extra reach, especially for the way I'm fishing here in Pennsylvania a lot. It's, kind of flipping flies out there under bushes and stuff like that. And then when you get over to some of the bigger rivers, the extra, 6 inches helps you get across some of those currents a little easier. So fishing that, I, having to abide by FIPS rules, use a Euro line on my reel. If I didn't, I would be using just straight monofilament for probably 50 feet. And then I fish a microleader system for the vast majority of my nymphing. They're really effective systems once you get the hang of it, and they can be really versatile. But I'm just fishing the Pierre Sempe material, which is probably the most popular, one of the most popular leader materials in .12 or .14 millimeter, depending on the situation.
Okay.
And for me, that's double the rod length, as a competitor. But for just a regular angler, I would spool it up as much as you want to cast.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And is that, I've heard of the Pure Sempe. Is that something that you can kind of go out there and pick up, or is that something that you got to have some connections?
You can get it on my teammate Devin's store, Tactical Fly Fisher.
Oh, you can. Okay.
I think he's the only person in the U.S. that sells it, but he has a whole bunch of it, so it's well attainable.
Yeah, it is. Okay, good. And so you said the Euroline. How is the Euroline different from just, like you said, if you could go mono, what's the difference there? What is the Euroline? Is it just tapered a little bit, or how is that different?
So the Euroline is pretty much a workaround for the FIPS rules to limit the weight of the line while staying legal. So it's a 0.22 inch level diameter fly line. I think it's an 8-pound core with just a coating over it. So it's as small as you can go with being FIPS legal. So it works fine for what we needed to, but the disparity between the leader size and the fly line size now is pretty massive as far as weight goes. So if you're, going to be fishing one of those microleader systems, it's much better to just have 50 feet of that so that you never have to deal with any sag, as opposed to a big heavy line kind of hanging out of your guides when you get any distance out there.
Right. And then you said, so with that rig, you can cover, how far can you cover out, or would you cover out, say, if you were nymphing?
It depends on the tactic. For kind of the sighter floating type tactics, you can cast the whole leader, which is 21 feet or so, and then another 10 feet of line or so out. And, with the rod length, that's about 40 feet, and cover all that water above you or out a little bit. With regular kind of nymphing, the standard way, holding the leader off the water, you're usually trying to keep the line within the guides. So somewhere around 30 feet with that leader extended, 25, 30 feet is where we're fishing primarily, but on the average.
Yeah, on the average. And describe that a little bit on the sighter, the floating sighter rig. Is that, how are you doing that? And how is that different from just your typical Euro kind of nymphing setup?
So that's something I do a lot here in Pennsylvania with our kind of slower spring creeky waters. And it's, people like to call it tight line nymphing, to refer to all these tactics, but it's not really fishing on a tight line. It's casting up and using the leader as your strike indicator still, but it's on the water, kind of floating with the current. And you're just watching that for movements similar as you would to holding it up, but you can fish really light flies far away from you with that method, because you're not influencing them at all. It's just letting the current do what it wants with the fly and the leader. You're just watching for any little movement there.
Okay. Is it kind of like similar to like the dry dropper, if you had that sort of setup on there?
It's sort of similar, but the leader isn't really acting as a suspension device. Everything's kind of flowing down at once. So your leader will float there as the fly's sinking, but then as soon as that fly touches bottom, that kind of leader and sighter will dip under the water, and you can still continue fishing it. You just kind of watch further back on the sighter as it sinks further and further. And that's how I like to fish a lot. You can get some very, very finesse presentations in areas that you really wouldn't be able to with standard tight line tactics.
Okay. And is all this today, I think you mentioned everything we're talking about here, this could apply to what you're going to be doing in Idaho next year? Is that the case, just maybe heavier? How would you change that from what we're talking about now as you get into some of these different larger or faster streams?
So it for sure could apply. It's just kind of within specific areas on those rivers. So when you find some of those longer flats that will have, on any river really, it can definitely play a role. You will usually be fishing a little bit heavier, a little bit longer tippet in those bigger rivers, but it's the same tactic, just kind of adapted to the situation.
Okay. And one of the streams that there's some famous streams on both sides, west and east. You have a bunch of them there where you mentioned the Henry's Fork is one. I'm not sure. I'm guessing you guys will be fishing that. Have you fished that before? And how different is that stream versus some of those spring creeks that you're fishing back, in your neck? Because I know that the Henry's Fork is known as a pretty technical stream, right?
Yeah, so the Henry's Fork is pretty different from the streams we have out here. Did fish it during our national championships a few weeks ago, but that was my first experience. But I will kind of refrain from giving any specific info on it to maintain whatever competitive advantage we have.
Yeah, definitely. I think that, and we've talked a ton about it, from a number of different guests, but yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's technical for a number of reasons. I'm sure it gets a lot of pressure, but are the species that you're focusing on, are they going to be the same species? Are we talking about rainbow trout? Is that kind of the focus in both areas?
So over in my neck of the woods, we're mostly fishing for wild brown trout. That's kind of the main draw for our streams. We do have a very small amount of wild rainbows, and then obviously stocked rainbows are a big deal out here. But over there, it's kind of flipped. They have a lot more rainbows on average than they do brown trout. And no, I don't think any stalker, maybe a little bit of stalking in some of the watersheds, but mostly wild fish. So same species, different proportions. And on some waters, we'll have cutthroat and whitefish as well.
And whitefish. And like you said, they're trout, so they're not that much different. Things that you're using for one species are applying and across the board, right? That's whether it's brook trout or any of these trout species.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like the first time I fished the Henry's Fork, I fished it pretty much the same as I fished some of our smaller high gradient rivers out here, and did perfectly well. And different species, different water type, but eat the same, fight the same.
That's right. Nice. Well, I want to get into some on the technical side of it, but I want to take it back real quick to, kind of, you mentioned 2014 getting started. How did that start for you? Were you fishing, fly fishing well before that? Or it seems like there's such a small amount of people that are in the arena where you guys are with Team USA. How did that all kind of get started?
Yeah, so I started fly fishing when I was around 8. I was gifted the intro setup from a relative. And I'd always enjoyed fishing in general.
So you had a relative, it was a relative like an uncle that was a big fly angler and said, hey, this 8-year-old kid should check this out.
Not quite. It was an aunt that bought the equipment and then decided she didn't like it.
Oh, there you go.
So I got her hand-me-downs and did not really have much
That's funny.
tutelage for the first couple of years.
Was this aunt on your mom's side or your dad's side?
Mom's.
Okay, so
more of an aunt by proxy.
Okay.
More of a friend that is
sure
very close. But so got the equipment from her, but no real mentorship there as far as how to do it. So I think for the first couple of years, I thought you had to bounce the fly off the top of the water to get the fish to come up and eat it. So didn't have too much success until I was about 10. But had a local LL Bean store that offered fly tying and fly fishing classes. And I got into some of those, and that really kind of started it off for me with some success on panfish and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Was that in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, that was in Pittsburgh where I grew up. So
yeah, Pittsburgh a little bit different than where you are now.
Pittsburgh is very different from where I am now. Not too much in the way of trout out that way. We have some stock streams, but they're not great. I had good places to practice with that, get a feel for it, and obviously when you're a kid, any fish is super awesome and as good as any other one. So that's kind of how I got really started into it. And then the youth team is based in State College, Pennsylvania, and my parents took me up there as a summer trip, little vacation type deal. And I just kind of learned about it through the fly shop up there. I think George Daniel was still working there at that time. And this was circa 2011, 2012. So his book was at the height of its popularity, Dynamic Nymphing. And so they heard talk of it in there and saw somewhere, I'm not sure where, that the youth team was holding a clinic in on Fishing Creek. And so I went to that when I was 13. I think I celebrated my birthday there. So 13 and 14. And then I did my first competition. I liked what I saw. Did my first competition a week later, and have been doing it pretty hard ever since.
Yeah, that's right. What was that first competition? Do you remember that pretty well?
I do, actually. It was on a stream called Sandy Creek in northwest Pennsylvania, about an hour north of Pittsburgh, 2 hours, somewhere in there. And it was terrible. I think the winner caught like 4 fish. I caught 1, but for some reason I liked it and I kept coming back, and
Yeah.
it got better from there.
Nice. And then it just kind of rolled into eventually. Well, when you first got going, when you were kind of I think you said were you 16 when you first got onto the youth team?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, 16. So at that time, things had they evolved, where they had a good system for the whole selection? Is it different than it is now?
So I'm not totally sure how the youth team still does it now. At that time, it was mostly coach's choice and how you did in, national championships. That's the only competition we had that was youth specific. And I think it's still relatively similar, but we usually only had, 25 kids to 30 kids competing at any time. So about half of everyone that wanted to got on the youth team back then.
Yeah. Right. There's a lot more now, and that's part of the reason why it's such a good team. There's just more competition and higher level. Yeah, for sure. Some of the kids these days are just crazy good. I work with a lot of them, for lessons. They would far outpace me if we were both there back in the day. Yeah, the competition. That's always the funny thing. I always love to go back to the sports analogies and like basketball. I was I was YouTubing out yesterday and was watching old Dr. J videos on YouTube, and man, that guy was spectacular. But you bring in Jordan, right, LeBron, and it's like a different game, right? Things have changed, or even Stephen Curry shooting these shots from half court. Is it kind of the same in fly fishing, that the level, did things change and things are just a whole nother level higher than they were?
Yeah, for sure. It's the access to information and good equipment these days is 100 times what it was when I started. And then the techniques have progressed. The microleader systems are popular now. The casting is much better than when I started, just in the general angling population. So it's a big mix of that, and just these kids really enjoy it. It's not even as common these days to get out on the water as a kid than when I started. So the kids that are out there really just loving it.
Yeah, definitely. Nice. And you had you had some medals, right, under your belt, and was that with the youth? Remind us again on that. Did you have some there too?
I did, yeah. So I got team silver in Slovenia, team bronze in Slovenia, and a team silver in the Czech Republic. So it was definitely a big learning experience for me through the years, and growth is a team, just as the way the youth team operates and how things go. But it definitely prepared me very well for what I'm doing now with the men's team, and the way that we worked as a unit and really put an emphasis on the team aspect of the sport.
Yeah, that's the huge game changer for you guys, it sounds like. So let's take it back again. We don't have to get into super specifics, but let's just think new water, right? You're getting ready for something, or somebody listening's getting ready for that. What is that? What are you thinking so you got all the prep to get there before you get there, but as you get on the water, say you're going to a new area, what are you, how should somebody be preparing as they kind of walk up to the stream? They're in their car. They haven't ever fished this stream before. What would you tell them for advice?
Yeah. So, the first thing that I look at as I'm walking up to the stream, any bugs flying around, any bird activity that may indicate there's some dry fly action possible. Obviously, any rises that are visible from just walking up. Probably most of the time that's not the case, but when it is, it's a lucky day, and I'll run back to the car and grab my dry fly rod and spend the day doing that. But when it's not the case, then I second thing I look at is water temperature. How cold or warm is the water, and that's gonna really dictate what the fish are doing and what I kind of start out with as far as tactics and fly weights go. So when the water's colder, I'm going to start lower and heavier. When it's kind of that nice, like 63 degrees range, 60 to 63, I'm going to probably start out a little higher and faster because those fish are more active. And then usually more fast, riffly water when the warmer the water gets, up until that kind of cutoff point where you don't want to fish anymore. So I'm going to take that into consideration, rig up. I usually start with kind of the same length of tippet, right around 4 to 5 feet. If the water's really on the shallow side, I'm going to tend towards 4. If it's on average 3 or less. And if it's on a little bit of the deeper side, kind of that 4 foot to 6 foot range on average, then I'm going to start with kind of that 5 foot. And like to keep it pretty consistent, just to have a really good idea of where that fly is at all times. If you're changing your tippet to match a lot of scenarios exactly, it gets hard to have an intuitive picture of what's happening under the water. So I usually adjust that by holding my sighter / leader a little more above the water for shallow water, or sinking it in deeper water. That's definitely the benefit of these smaller leaders, is that you can sink them pretty well without affecting the drift too drastically. And so starting out with that, and I'll start with, I have 3 drifts that I do pretty consistently. One is high and a little fast, and I always like to start with that one because if there's any fish that are extra active, they're going to eat fast, and if you give them too much slack on the first drift, you're going to miss them.
And high and fast is kind of like within the first foot of below the surface sort of thing?
Yeah, so that kind of first 6 to 18 inches, depending on the water depth, kind of relative. And it's going to be a low sighter angle. So sighter off the water is going to be 15 to 20 degrees or so, and leading about the water speed, if not a little bit faster, depending on the temperature and the bug activity and what it may seem like the fish activity is going to be. And then after that, I'll kind of go a little deeper, a little slower with a kind of mid-column drift, sighter angle around like that 45 degrees, kind of the more classic drift you see. Nothing there. Then I'll go a little bit deeper, kind of the bottom bouncing that a lot of people associate with the tight line tactics, and that kind of steeper sighter angle, slower drift with matching the bottom current speed. And usually one of those is going to put up, if you do it in enough places, do it enough times, starting out in some good looking water, one of those is going to result in some action. And if not, then I'll start trying different things, like stand further back and sighter floating some really light flies to see if they want a little bit more finesse drift. Try some junk flies out and see if they're just being a little snotty and need a good reason to eat. But just really situational as far as what the progression is going to be. Kind of got to play off the conditions and meet the fish where you expect them to be.
Yeah. Can you do that technique? I'm picturing like the South Fork of the Snake, a big river. Could you do that same technique? And how would you find, the fish on such a big river like that?
So when I'm fishing a bigger river, I try and break it into a smaller river, at least to start out, to get a picture of where those fish might be. For really big river, that's usually going to be fishing some of the bank water where it's kind of most defined. So I'm going to find some bigger rocks off the bank, or some blowdowns, drop-offs, some sort of obvious structure, and just start there with the same kind of progression, adjusting the fly weight to meet whatever the water depth or condition may be, and just kind of work that stuff until I get into some fish and gain a little confidence about type of water they're sitting in, speed of water, depth, all that. And once I have that, then I'll probably work a little bit into some of the main water if it's accessible. The South Fork of the Snake really can't take too many steps off the bank there. But, with some of the bigger but still manageable rivers, you can wade around a little bit. And I'll just kind of pick through that water until I have just a really good idea of where they are. With, massive rivers like the South Fork, usually you're going to be kind of stuck fishing up the bank. And in that case, it's much easier because your options are limited for you. All you got is that bank water, and you should be able to kind of pick up where they are, what they're sitting in, and how they're feeding relatively quickly. Because rivers like that can honestly have less fishable water than a small stream if you're, really on high water.
Right. That's true. And now these techniques out there, especially in the West, lots of people are fishing out of boats. Can you do that? Is that something you've done before with this style of, kind of, Euro nymphing?
Yeah, you certainly can. It depends on, what the water is specifically. Out here in Pennsylvania, with our rivers are pretty well defined, even through the middle. They're not crazy deep or crazy fast. And we do that a bunch. I know out west with some of those really big, deep rivers, that would be a little bit harder. But the good thing about this technique is you can always throw an indicator on the end and get some really awesome, massively long drifts fishing that kind of style. Euro nymphing has kind of been pigeonholed into a relatively small set of tactics, but the real mindset behind it is being adaptive and meeting the fish on their terms. And if you're not following a set of rules like in a competition, you can adapt that whatever way you see fit. So fishing it out of a boat with an indicator is something I do relatively often, and it's probably the most effective way to throw a nymph from a boat.
Yeah, to cover. And you mentioned the kind of the three drifts, and depending on water temperature, high and fast, mid, calm, deeper. On the deeper, you said matching the current, the bottom speed of the current. How do you do that when you're fishing down? And what speed is the current going out at the bottom versus, say, top or in the middle?
Yeah. So the current is always going to be stratified with kind of the fastest current near the surface, assuming there's nothing breaking it up, and gets slower as you get towards the bottom, just because of the friction and turbulence against the bottom substrate there. So the bigger the substrate you have on the bottom, the slower your current speed is going to be. So in a river with a really heavily rocky bottom, you might have a current that's barely crawling by. And on a river with silty or kind of pea gravel bottom, it may just be ripping through there almost at the same speed as the surface. And fish usually don't really like that. They can still find some little depressions to sit in there. But I kind of look for bottom structure that offers a little bit. But your bottom current's going to be relatively slower compared to the top. You got to get your fly down there so that it can kind of anchor up in that turbulent bottom section where it has a chance to drift by the fish at a pace that they can actually jump out and eat it. So you're going to want a little bit heavier fly usually to reach that bottom and stick it down there. In a really big river like the Snake, I'd probably be fishing a 4 mil fly, so a fly with a 4 mil tungsten bead, or potentially even two of the same size, depending on just how fast the surface current is ripping through there. And then in the cast itself, you have to have some slack to allow those flies to actually sink down. If you start out with tension, they're never going to be able to really break through that kind of faster surface and mid layer. So doing what we call a tuck cast, which is basically a little bit of a higher angled cast that's going to drop to the water and add some slack in there, give the flies a chance to sink down. And once they get down there, you're going to see a little bit of a slowdown in your sighter. And that's just because the flies are heavy enough that they can anchor in that bottom current and not be pulled back up if you're leading downstream. And you're going to be able to actually watch your sighter kind of slowly move through water with the surface current and the bubbles on top kind of sliding past it. And the key there is that you don't want to lead your flies so fast that you're pulling them downstream. Kind of want to let the flies dictate the speed so that you actually know how fast that bottom current is moving. So it's good to kind of start out moving a little bit slower than you think you need and just kind of see what the sighter angle is doing. If it's kind of pointing downstream, that would indicate that the flies are moving a little faster than you are. You might be pulling them up or a little bit out of contact. And if it's pointing kind of back upstream at a, really tight angle, then probably means you're pulling them downstream a little too fast. So you want a nice 45-ish degree angle with a little bit of a belly in there, not a super laser straight sighter. And just that's how you kind of match that bottom current speed.
Right. And then you see what's going on, and then you match. And then could you adjust it from there a little faster or a little slower? Or are you just trying to really match that speed of wherever the flies are every time?
Yeah, when I'm down on the bottom, kind of fishing in that way, I'm usually letting the current dictate the speed. When you start pulling them faster, you're going to start pulling them up into kind of the mid currents. That's just the way the force works on the tippet. If you're pulling it downstream, you're also pulling it upstream a little bit, or up in the column a little bit. So you usually don't pull them any faster. I will try and add some more slack into the presentation and do what we call inverting the drift. So inverting that sighter upstream, and that kind of helps them slow down a little bit more than if you're just kind of leading them through the drift. So that's especially in like winter fishing or when the fish are really just locked on the bottom because they're unhappy, that kind of inverted drift comes into play a lot.
Okay. So that's what the fish are doing. So when it gets really cold and you're, closer to 30 than 60 degrees or something like that, the fish they're just kind of hunkered on the bottom because it takes less energy. It's slower. Is that kind of what they're doing? They're not as active?
Yeah. When they're cold, metabolism's low, just not really happy, they're trying to conserve energy, they'll definitely lock into that slower current on the bottom. Usually try and find some deeper, slower kind of runs and pulls where they can still have food coming by them. They don't want the slack water, but they want something they're not going to have to expend too much energy in.
Yeah, perfect. And describe that again on the inverting. What is that again? How are you doing that as you're changing the fly speed?
So it's a little bit hard to describe, but basically what you're doing is making a pretty high slack cast, allowing those flies or single fly to hit the bottom, get into that slower ribbon of current.
Right. So you actually feel a tip that you feel that fly touch the bottom.
So you don't necessarily feel it, but you'll see kind of that initial slow down in the movement of your sighter. Some people call that like the downshift. So that slowing of the sighter, showing that your flies are anchoring on the bottom. And then instead of starting to lead them through the drift, with that sighter pointing upstream with your rod tip below the fly, you're going to basically let the current take the slack out of the system. And when you do that, you'll see kind of a second downshift in speed. So you'll see the indicator and leader kind of flow downstream, and then it'll get to a point where it has a nice downstream bow in it, and it'll just kind of slow a little bit more. And at that point, you start leading it down or following it downstream at a relatively slow angle. You're just trying to maintain whatever angle and bow that sighter decided it wanted when the current pulled the slack out. And it sounds counterintuitive because you're letting the current take the slack, but anytime your sighter is downstream of those flies, anytime you're leading them downstream, you're imparting a little bit of extra force on the flies. Whereas with an inverted drift like that, kind of allowing only the current to do the work instead of you and the current, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. Nice. Okay. Well, this is great. I think I want to touch base a little bit back, circle back on the dry fly setup. But before we get in here, I just want to kind of start to take it out on our Fly Shop Friday segment. You mentioned it before, you're talking about George Daniel back in the day in the Fly Shop. First, I just want to mention this segment is presented by Wet Fly Swing Pro. This is kind of our community of listeners in the podcast who are kind of taking it to the next step. They're traveling. They're chatting together. We're trying to build some other webinars and stuff at Wet Fly Swing Pro. So first, we want to give a big shout out there. But on the Fly Shop, maybe talk about that. What was that Fly Shop that George Daniel you mentioned had worked at? And then what is your home fly shop now?
So that fly shop was TCO in State College. Pretty well known fly shop, pretty big one. And actually, there's still my home fly shop. There's a TCO here in.
Yeah, because there's a few, right? There's a few shops in Pennsylvania TCO has.
There is, I think they're up to four now, four or five. But yeah, so I have one 8 minutes down the road from my place now, and I'll have one pretty much 8 minutes down the road from my place.
No kidding.
When I move up to Bellefonte.
Are there more TCO fly shops or Orvis in fly shops in Pennsylvania that you know of?
Oh, I only know of one Orvis shop.
Okay.
Personally, so
Yeah.
there's one in Pittsburgh, but I know
Yeah.
there's at least four TCOs.
That's cool. What is it? What does TCO stand for?
It stands for Tupelhocken Creek Outfitters. So they started out on a creek in eastern PA called Tupelhocken Creek. It's a really long name, so they shortened it down to TCO, and they've expanded significantly since then.
That's cool. And so that's your shot. And what has been, their success? What do they do really well out there? Why have they become kind of one of those leaders out there?
They're just all really great guys. They're, it's an awesome fly shop. They really were super nice to me when I was a kid starting out, with offering advice, offering where to fish. And I've become really good friends with pretty much everyone that works there over the years, even though, there's some turnover with, they employ a lot of college students. So everyone that works through it is just an awesome person. And they're always going to steer you in the right direction if you go out there and ask for some inside info.
That's cool. Right on. Well, that's our shout out, our Fly Shop Friday segment shout out here. Let's take it back. We'll just touch a little bit on the dries but I do want to hear about, you mentioned as a new angler, let's say somebody's listening now, maybe they're new to some of these ideas we're talking about, or just new in general to fly fishing. Well, what sort of advice do you give to that newer angler on having success?
My biggest piece of advice is absorb a lot of info. We live in just such an information-rich age, especially in this sport, that you can buy a book or two that has the entirety of what it took me 18 years to learn, when I was getting into college and thought I knew everything. And then more stuff always comes out, but you can find so much good info and figure out so much on your own that just even 10 years ago, you absolutely couldn't find anywhere. So I'm big on reading. I read a lot of books. So there's so many good ones out there from really good anglers. And
what do you think are if you had to say, look on your desk, kind of your top, those books that are just maybe one or two that are kind of standards everybody should probably have on their shelf?
So actually, I wrote an article about it just a couple weeks ago. My 10 books that are going to teach you pretty much everything.
Oh, there you go. What was the title again?
It's the 10 best fly fishing books of the 21st century.
Oh, nice.
And all informational books. I kind of put it in a way that if you never heard of fly fishing before and you bought all 10 books, if you read them, you'd have pretty much the entirety of the information.
Oh, this is great.
Become an expert.
This is great. Yeah, I'm looking at it now. We'll put a link in the show notes. We'll have a blog post to go along with this. And I see, I'll just name a couple. You got Orvis Fly Fishing Guide, of course, Tom, Perfecting the Cast, Ed Jaworowski, who we've had on as well. You got number 3, Fish On, A Guide to Playing Landing Big Fish. I'm not familiar with Floyd. Is it Frankie?
Not sure how to pronounce his last name, but that's probably my favorite book on the list because fighting fish is always a little bit of an overlooked skill. But that book really just encompasses all the knowledge you need to know to land a fish of any size that really I've not seen written or shown anywhere, in as much detail with as good an explanation.
That's amazing. Yeah, and there's a foreword by Joan Wolfe, who we've also had on here. And this is great because I think landing a fish is a challenge, both new and experienced anglers, right? Especially, you're fishing lighter gear and you got this giant fish on. Like, what do you do? What would be your tip on landing fish? I know there's different things out there, but is there one quick one you'd give on advice to somebody that does get that trophy fish on?
Yeah. So biggest thing with fighting fish, I'll give two pieces of advice. The first is to keep it above you. as soon as the fish gets below you, you're fighting the fish and the current. If you keep the fish above you, it's fighting you and the current. So the more you can keep it above your position, the better the chance you have to land it. So when I hook a fish of, any size, then I'm not going to be able to flip it into the net immediately. I'm already headed downstream, trying to keep it as far above me as I can. So that's the number one. And the number two is don't keep the rod straight up. You got to move it to one side or the other so you can have some control over that fish's head, and it can't just run wherever it wants. So we call it side pressure. Side pressure is key to landing fish of any size.
Perfect. Great. And I'll just run through a few more of these because these are awesome books. You mentioned it, George Daniels' Dynamic Nymphing. You've got Euro Nymphing. This is Josh Miller, who we've talked to recently, Tactical Fly Fishing. I mean, yeah, you've got the list of, a pretty amazing, yeah, you're right, all these things. I pretty much recognize, I don't know, I've heard of Paul Weimer. I haven't had him on the podcast. And then another George Daniel, and then Devin Olson, Stillwater, right? And that's one thing we haven't talked about today is Stillwaters are huge for comp because do you always have a Stillwater whenever you're fishing the championship?
There is pretty much always a Stillwater at Worlds. I can't think of any in recent memory that didn't have one. But yeah, Stillwaters are what we kind of call the turning point. When you get on there, it's equal for everyone. Everyone has the same opportunity to get into fish. They can go wherever they want, fish however they want. So if you are good at Stillwater fishing, then you're going to do well. And if you're not, then you're going to do poorly, and that's going to hurt your placing. So Stillwaters really are the determining factor of a lot of world championships.
Nice. No, this has been great, Mike. I think one more question won't take too long, and then we'll jump into a couple quick random ones and get out of here. But the dry fly, I want to bring it back to that. So you're on the water. We talked about the nymphing and how you cover everything there. Let's say they are sipping some bugs, or you're seeing heads on this. Let's take it back to that stream, the big stream. You're fishing a big water like the South Fork. What do? You see some bugs. Maybe there's some mayflies. Maybe there's some October caddis. Whatever. How do you decide what that first fly is, or do you have one you're always is like your go-to that kind of imitates a lot of things?
Yeah. So I love dry fly fishing. Much as people wouldn't expect it, I'm pretty much a dry fly purist from April to June out here. So it's definitely, if I can do it, I'm gonna do it. Usually, you kind of have an idea of what's you could see on the water. The local fly shop or a local guide is going to tell you, at least for what month you're there, what you can expect to see. And that's a good place to start. So you definitely want to have the range of flies in kind of whatever aspect is going to be out there: caddis, mayflies, stoneflies, or terrestrials. And I use what's called a Spanish system, or a kind of a competition specific dry fly system. I think you had Jack on, and he was talking about that for a while. So gonna usually try for lighter tippets, for really long, really kind of finesse drifts, blind dry, or fishing to specific fish depending on what's going on. But as far as fly, you definitely need to be a little bit more discerning with dry flies than nymphs. At least get the stage kind of right. For spinners, you're going to want something that's sitting a little bit lower on the water, usually something that has that kind of similar wing profile. For, emergers and duns, you kind of want something that's going to have a good bit above the water, but also sits low enough that it could be either. That's kind of what I do, is I try and get something in between an emerger and a dun. So I fish a lot of shuttlecocks, a lot of just really low riding kind of CDC patterns. So I try and cover as much as I can with one fly, but you definitely can't get away with it quite the same as you can nymphing.
No. Yeah, you got to match the hatch a little bit when you're fishing dries. Although there's a few flies out there like I go to like the missing link, maybe the X caddis. There's some that kind of work, of the parachute atoms maybe. What are your? Do you have a few that you just say more generalist patterns that you really love? Maybe a few dry flies.
Yeah, so I fish, like I said, shuttlecocks a lot, which is basically a CDC pattern that kind of hangs under the water. But if you kind of put some floatant on the main body, it'll sit on top, looking pretty similar to a dun. Good enough that for the most part, I just fish that for both, and usually get away with it. For caddis, just a little CDC wing caddis, and for spinners, like an EP spinner, and just kind of matching the body size and color to whatever's out there. But those are really the only like patterns I fish, and they're just adapted to match whatever bug's on the water. I rarely see any stoneflies or anything out here, so I'm mostly on those kind of mayflies, caddis, midges, and a couple terrestrials. CDC ant is one that I fish a lot all over, because ants exist pretty much everywhere in the world. So a great kind of universal fly, but very simple patterns, mostly CDC. Not a lot that actually have like names to them, but just.
But no, all the right material, CDC is always is good. Is that kind of your one material if you're thinking on a dry fly or just fly in general? What's your go-to? We were talking to Craig Matthews, who was talking about their new book where it's all peacock, or not. Sorry, it's not peacock. It's pheasant. They're using pheasant tail for everything. But what's your material?
Yeah, definitely CDC. It's a wonder material. Collars on nymphs, wings on dry flies, even kind of some extra movement on some lake flies and streamers like that. It's just a great material. And then close second would probably be pheasant. So
yeah, pheasant.
But
yeah, what about peacock? Is that in any of your flies?
I don't use peacock in any of my flies, actually.
Yeah, that thing sinks a little bit, right? What is the peacock? I mean, it's got the good coloration, how it reflects, but there's probably other materials, the body materials, that work just as well.
Yeah, I mean, it breathes really nice, kind of those little fibers move around, but it's a little fragile and a
yeah, it is fragile,
a little annoying to work with. So
yeah,
dubbing usually works pretty much as well, and I've never missed it personally.
yeah, definitely. Nice. Okay, well, just a couple of random ones here and I want to take it out of here with some gear you mentioned earlier. I always love the vest, or not even the vest, because that's not even really a conversation, but the packs and what you're using. It sounds like you're traveling a little bit lighter. First, let's talk about what you're wearing for your pack, your vest or whatever, and then talk about kind of a net. Like, what's your gear there?
Yeah, so for a pack, I'm using an $18 concealed carry chest pack from Amazon. So
nice.
It's pretty small. It fits about a box, a big, double page box, and then a slim box. That's all I carry with me. I can send you the name to throw in the show notes.
Sure.
But
that'd be great. So you're light. So you basically have your boxes. What else do you have in your vest?
I got my boxes, and then so I've got, my nymphs and dries in one box, and then some junk flies and streamers in the slim box. I've got hemostats on me for when, the fish take it a little deep, tippet, and a spool of leader material for if I break off a microleader. And that's about it. Some floating and grease for floating the cider and fishing dry flies, and paint pen.
Oh, paint pen, yeah.
Yeah, marking up that cider a little bit. But
yeah, so pretty simple. Very simple. You really don't need. I mean, this is dry flies and nymphing. Like, you don't need some crazy giant pack to carry all your stuff. It's really pretty streamlined.
Yeah. That's dry flies, nymphing, streamers. Pretty much every tactic under the sun I can do with what I got in there. It's great for competitions when you got nothing extra. If you want to carry a sandwich and a phone with you when you're fishing for fun, it's a little bit small, but for what I do with competition fishing, it's about perfect for me.
Okay. And what about a net? How is your net? What are you using, and how is it attaching and all that stuff?
Yeah, so I have a net called a Mavarti competition net. It's from the Czech Republic. It's got really nice like micro mesh bottom, so your flies won't fall through. And it's just a super light net, so you really don't notice it's there half the time. And I've got it shoved into a Fraybill net handle, so it's a little bit of a Frankenstein net, but just trying to keep it as light as possible. And got it connected so I have mine set up a little differently than a lot of people. There's a magnet that hangs off the side of the hoop that gets connected to the middle of the pack and kind of my mid back. And then a gear keeper retractor kind of tied off so that it's a set length hanging off the left side of me. So the handle kind of hangs directly where my left hand would reach back. So I can get to it really fast. And took me a long time to kind of settle on, that setup for the net and the pack, but it's really kind of fine-tuned for my style.
That's awesome. Could we see that, or that setup? Is that on your website? I know you have a great blog and all that. Do you talk about the gear at all?
It will be for sure at some point. I haven't had the chance to write about it yet, but it's definitely on the list. I do have a couple Instagram posts with it going through.
Okay.
Yeah,
perfect.
Nothing on the blog itself yet.
Okay, good. And last one for you here. You mentioned at the start the rafts. I'm in the market now for a new raft. I've been looking around. I don't know if I'm going big, small. You mentioned you've got a couple of rafts as you're off the air when we got started. You're moving here. What is your raft? What are those rafts you're using most of the time?
Yeah. So I have two rafts. Right now, they both live in my very small townhouse. We're moving, and it's not fun. One's a couch at the moment, which is kind of nice.
Nice.
But so
that's
I have,
cool.
A Flycraft 2-man, the older stealth model from like 2021, which is, I think it's 12 by 4 feet. So gets in some small spaces. Yeah, it's a narrow one. It's really good for some of our smaller rivers around here. We don't have, quite the water size they have out west and some other places where, boat fishing is popular. So I'm using that for probably the majority of my fishing out here. And then when we get some big pushes of water in the spring and the late winter, I've got a 14 by 7 foot Rocky Mountain.
Rocky Mountain. Yeah, Rocky Mountain boats.
Yeah, it's a massive boat for our rivers. It's big. One of the bigger ones I've seen rocking around out here. But it's got its nice like a drop floor. So it's got a hard floor, nice. It's custom framed, so it's great for 2 anglers or 6 people if you're just having a good time down.
Yep, having a good time. Awesome. So yeah, I think you mentioned I love the boats. We had a whole season we did on kind of boats on the podcast here. I just talked to the guys out at Saturn Rafts, and they have actually they told me, I didn't even realize this, but Flycraft, I think when they first got started, they were using Saturn was making their boats initially, and I think they've probably maybe have their own infrastructure going now. But yeah, there's a lot of connections in the raft, and where you're going, actually, Idaho. You guys are heading next year. I mean, that's especially, I think, towards Boise, huge, NRS air rafts are huge. Do you guys have rafts? Are there companies out there? I know there's some drift boat companies out east. Are there any raft companies out there?
We've got Stealth Craft up
Stealth, right. They do rafts, yeah.
They do rafts. That's the only one I know of on the East Coast. And then I think that's about it. I don't think we have any others.
That might be it. Yeah, it's just not as much of a need, really, right? Out there, you don't have as much big water, right? All the need for kind of crazy white water and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's not as popular out here, but we have some just really awesome floats available to us in PA and the surrounding states that are underutilized for how awesome they are.
This is perfect. Okay, Mike. Well, as always, I struggle to get out of here, but I want to respect your time. We'll send everybody out to innovativeangling.com if they want to follow up on anything we talked about. It, like I said, it's great. You got articles there. You've got virtual lessons, presentations, lots of stuff. So hopefully in the future we'll be staying in touch with you. And I'm excited because next year, when you guys head out that way, I'm hoping I can connect and be there in person and see you guys maybe take home a gold. What do you think of that? When you think of next year, I know you can't, you guys are taking the bronze. I mean, there's always a chance. Is it just kind of like, because everybody's so good. I mean, I know we're on our home waters. How are you feeling about next year?
Before nationals, I was feeling a little shaky just because I'd never seen the water out there. Even the guys that live out west, it's still kind of far from them. So they hadn't fished it a ton either. But after fishing it at nationals, spending a lot of time on it, confidence kind of skyrocketed. It's really up our alley. We really have a lot of kind of insider knowledge on those venues. So we're pretty confident, or at least pretty hopeful that we'll bring home something.
I asked that too. I didn't want to jinx the youth when I was talking to, I can't remember who I was talking to there, but Because they had already won the last two worlds, and this would have been a three-peat. And I was like, all right, I'm not going to jinx you, but what are your chances? I mean, but they did it, right? They took home their like three-peat, so which is kind of a dynasty almost, right? Does that seem like 3 in a row seems crazy? Has that ever happened in any level?
I believe it happened to the youth team in like 2014, 15, 16. I could be wrong.
Really?
I know they took 3 medals in a row. I can't remember if it was 3 golds. I know at least 2 were golds. So our youth team has always been, really, really awesome because the kids are just so into it. They love working together. I think our coaching staff are just really awesome and organized compared to a lot of places. But yeah, Josh has done an absolute.
Oh yeah, awesome, Josh Miller, of course. Yeah.
He's done an awesome job coaching in the last couple of years. He was my coach when I was on the youth team as well.
Oh, no kidding.
So he's super old. He's a grandpa.
He is. He is.
He was the assistant coach back then, but so he got to learn a lot during that time, and he's really put it to good use. He's doing just the best job ever. He's just an amazing coach with the kids.
Yeah, Josh is awesome. So cool, Mike. Well, thanks again for all your time. Like we said, innovativeangling.com, and looking forward to keeping in touch with you.
Yeah, you too. Hopefully I'll see you out west there.
If you want to connect with Mike, we mentioned it there. Check in with him. You can go to Team USA Fly Fishing or find him at innovativeangling.com. If you're interested in connecting with Mike or want to get a virtual lesson, please check in with me. Go to Wet Fly Swing Pro. That's wetflyswing.com/pro. And we can get you more information on how to connect with one of these virtual lessons. And please let Mike know you heard this podcast. We're getting ready for a big one next week. We mentioned Stillwaters briefly. We got the Littoral Zone. Phil Roy is back next week. This is going to be a great one. As always, get ready for this. And we've got a big trip going right now. If you want to get access to our Steelhead School Skeena Spay style right now, check in with me, Dave at wetflyswing.com. I'll let you know what I have. Your best chance for getting in on these trips is to join Wet Fly Swing Pro, our community, our paid community, where we're connecting and we're building trips together. And whether you're brand new to fly fishing or have some experience, this is the best place to take it to the next level and flatten that learning curve. Okay, hope you enjoyed this one. I hope you enjoy your next travels. I hope you enjoy all of your travels, and I hope you can experience that road less traveled. We'll talk to you soon.